Ok, donc bonjour à tous. Cet après-midi, on a le plaisir d'accueillir Émile Parolin qui, depuis quelques mois, est parmi nous, membre du labo dans l'équipe alpine de l'INRIA. Et alors, l'exposé va être en anglais, c'est ça? We speak in English on stable integral representation and numerical approximation of Helmholtz solution using plane wave, and the emphasis is on stability.
And why you speak in English?
Because some people here prefer.
Me?
Merci Albert, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this seminar. I'm happy to present this work. So this is a joint work with, which started during my postdoc in Pavia with Andrea Moyola. It was a joint project with Daniel Brecht from Leuven. And we continued this work with Nicolas Galante, who is here, and who was a master student with Andrea and myself, and who is now a PhD student in the lab with Bruno Després and myself. So this talk is about the Helmholtz equation. Minus Lavachian u minus k2u is 0. Here the main character is the wave number, kappa, which is a real positive number. And throughout the talk, the solution u is going to, the solution of the Helmholtz equation is going to be denoted by u. I consider only bounded domains omega in this talk as well. So I'm interested in numerical approximation of this solution u using the so-called TREFS method, which is a particular class of numerical method where the approximation is constructed as a finite superposition of particular solution of the PDE. So here, in this finite sum, all the phi m's are particular solution of the PDE, and in this case, the Helmholtz equation. So this is a method that was proposed almost a century ago by TREFS, hence the name of the method. And here I have indicated a review paper on TREFS method for the Helmholtz equation. So these type of methods are quite popular because of the enhanced accuracy that they can bring to the numerical accuracy, in particular compared to polynomial space type of methods. And I will show some numerical experiment to illustrate this. They are, however, limited somehow to only piecewise constant coefficients. So this is one limitation which can actually be relaxed in what are called the quasi-TREFS method, where the relaxation means that actually you don't impose to have exact solution, but only approximate solution of the PDE. The other limitation is that you can mostly consider only homogeneous PDEs. So here, there's no volume source term in the PDE. There are many formulations of TREFS method, square, TREFS discontinuous Galerkin, ultra-weak variational formulations. But this talk is not about TREFS formulation. I'm only going to focus on approximation properties of special class of particular solutions. So this talk is divided in three main parts. The first part is about one very popular choice of particular solutions, which are called plane waves. In particular, here I will call them propagative plane waves, for a reason I will explain. This is very popular, but there are some flaws in the approximation capabilities of this family. So we propose to use instead a generalization, which we call evanescent levels. I will conclude with some approximation results. So the first part about propagative plane waves. So the propagative plane wave is a very simple function. It's just a complex exponential e to the ik d dot x, where d is a vector in Rd. So here I'm going to consider 2D and 3D cases. And d satisfies d dot d is 1. So it's a simple parametrization of the family. D is the propagation vector. So this type of function are propagative in some sense. So they are oscillating in the direction given by the propagation vector d, and they are constant in the orthogonal direction. On the left here, you have a plot of the real part of one propagative plane waves. So it's an exact solution of the Helmholtz equation. You can check this quite rapidly because d.d is 1. They are popular in part because they are very easy and cheap to evaluate, both analytically and numerically, and as well as differentiation and integration. In particular, you have closed form of formula for the evaluation of integrals of such plane waves on a flat submanifold. So you have, in practice, in a flat mesh, you have an exact integration of all elements of the matrices that you're going to want to evaluate. So d.d is 1 means that this vector d belongs to the unit sphere. So it's quite easy to parameterize. We will use one angle in 2D and two angles in 3D. So this is very easy. One remark is that it's a global function. So the modulus of this function is 1 throughout the domain. So in that respect, it's similar to spectral methods. One drawback of this family is that they degenerate for in the limit either that the wave number tends to 0 or the domain shrinks in size. So this is a difficulty for numerical approximation. There have been one proposal to solve this issue somehow, which is given in these two papers. So now about discrete approximation using propagative plane waves. So the first remark I want to make is that it's quite easy to choose a discrete set of such plane waves. Basically, you just use evenly distributed direction vector d on the unit sphere, so that you have isotropic approximation capabilities. However, you can have some adaptivity in this type of family, so you can select particular directions if you have some knowledge a priori or a posteriori on the solution. So as I was saying, it's a very popular type of approximations. There are many applications. This is not exhaustive. So I mentioned the main motivation, which is Treff's method, but there are other type of applications. Inverse problems, for instance, or other areas of numerical methods. I'm thinking mainly about integral equations, where you can derive a fast multiple method using this type of way, because they are separate. They have they separate the variables. There are also different applications, for instance, in Nystrom collocation method to deal with the singularities arising from the kernel of the integral equations. And there are even applications to domain decomposition method. So it's very well known that it's very difficult to come up with a core space for the Helmholtz equation. So for two-level domain decomposition preconditioners, and there have been proposals of core spaces based on plane waves. On the theoretical side, there are approximation results that are known for this type of waves. And the main message is that you can achieve, you can prove better rates of convergence in terms of number of degrees of freedom compared to polynomial spaces. There are two types of techniques, mainly Taylor extensions in the work of Olivier Cessna and Bruno Desprez, which yields H estimates. And there is the Bequer theory, which can yield HP estimates, and which is more of a wave number explicit. And this is the work of Marcus Mélange, Andrea Moyola in his PhD thesis.
There is no boundary condition. You assume you have a function u on some bounded domain, and you just want to approximate over that domain.
Yes, so the solution, the target of the approximation u is going to solve the Helmholtz equation with some boundary conditions, so that you have a well-posed problem. But
the plane wave do not solve the same boundary
yes,
condition.
By construction. So yes, the different, yes, okay. Each element in general in the Treff's method, each element in each particular solution does not solve the boundary condition that your solution u satisfies. So in practice, and by in practice I mean in finite precision arithmetic, so in a computer, there are other limitations, and you don't observe the convergence estimates or the error estimates that are available in the literature. So there are somehow some limitation in the approximation capabilities of such a family. And the reason for that people give often give is that it's a redundant approximation set. So in particular, it generates very ill-conditioned linear systems. And you can see this when you take two plane waves with similar propagation directions at some point. Even though the family is linearly independent in infinite precision arithmetic, it's not true in infinite precision arithmetic. So there are some issues. So you need regularization to tackle this conditioning. And on this subject, I mentioned the work of Ben Adcock and Daniel Brecht, which is a fairly general analysis, but also the work of a group in Bordeaux and Pau in the context of Tracy method. There are some remedies to tackle this ill-conditioning, which are mainly based on changing the basis. So you no longer have a plane wave basis, you have other type of functions that are going to be used for the approximation. Okay, so this is somehow the state of the art. I want, however, to give a slightly different point of view on the problem that, from an approximation perspective, on what is the issue with propagative plane waves. And for this, I'm not going to consider anymore a finite sum of plane waves, but a continuous superposition of propagative plane waves, namely an integral representation. So I'm going to consider for a bounded domain omega the map T that maps V to U, where U is given by this formula. So it's an integral operator. The kernel of this integral operator is the propagative plane wave. The integration is performed on the parametric domain. So here, the unit sphere. And here you have V, which is a density, which is called the Nernst density, which lives in a L2 space. So then you get what is called in the literature an Nernst function. So it's very easy to show that this operator is bounded from L2 to the space of Helmholtz solution, equipped with the H1 norm. And moreover, any such function is solution of the Helmholtz equation in omega. One remark is that U does not depend on omega. Simple remark. But this has a consequence. It means that if you have an Helmholtz solution in a domain omega that admits such a representation, it's necessarily very small. So in fact, Helmholtz functions are interior functions. So necessarily, this Helmholtz solution needs to be can be extended outside the domain omega. So this is somehow a limitation. You can only represent smooth Helmholtz solution like this. However, and this is a good sign from an approximation perspective, this operator has dense image in the space of Helmholtz solution in omega. This is not a trivial result, and this is a result due to Vec. The bad news from a numerical approximation perspective is that this operator is compact. So this means that, in particular, it does not have a bounded inverse. And this is very bad for numerical approximation because this means that even if you have a perfectly fine Helmholtz solution that lives in the range of this operator T, so already a very smooth Helmholtz solution, it can happen that the density has a very large norm. And to illustrate this, I'm going to take a particular case of the disk, for which we can do a lot of implicit computations. So in the disk, I need to explain that there exists a Hilbert basis of the space of Helmholtz solution, which I denote by BP. So BP is the product of three terms. Beta P is just a normalization constant so that I have a unit H1 norm. Then you have JP, which is a Bessel function, and then a Fourier function, a complex exponential. So this is a countable family. You have a finite number of what are called propagative modes for P smaller than K. So this type of mode have their energy distributed throughout the domain. And for P larger than K, you have so-called evanescent modes where the energy is more concentrated on the boundary of the domain. And using the Jacobi-Unger identity, you can prove that all these modes are in the range of the operator T. So in particular, you can represent them exactly as an integral in this form, an integral representation of this form, where the density, the Laplace density B, is explicit. However, if you have a beta P that has, by definition, unit norm in the H1 norm, the density can have a very large F norm. In particular, it's growing exponentially with the index P. Actually, for this growth is valid for P smaller than K. For P larger than K, for P smaller than K, you have a bounded, nicely bounded density. So let's see how. So this is very good news. We have an exact representation of any element in the basis. And so let's take the 2D case. In this case, this is just an integral on the circle from 0 to 2 pi. So you can use, for instance, so in the integral of a periodic function, you can use the trapezoidal rule to discretize this integral, and you will get exponential convergence of the discrete sum to the basis element BP. So in particular, there exists a very good approximation of each BP for sufficiently large M, sufficiently many plane waves. So let's look at what are the numerical results. So here I'm going to approximate the propagative mode. And this is the kind of result that you get. Here on the top right, I have the residual. So it's a good measure of the error in this case. And on the bottom right, you have the size of the coefficients. So you can see that you have very quick convergence down to machine precision. The convergence is actually geometric. And the size of the coefficient is quite small. It's order 1 or maybe a bit more. One thing I want to mention is that already in this case, the linear system that I'm solving are very ill-conditioned. So even though the system is ill-conditioned, I am able to achieve machine precision. Now I'm going to switch to an evanescent mode. In this case, I can prove that the density in the integral representation has very large number. And the numerical, the discrete approximation also exhibits very large coefficients. And as a result, the residual, so there is some convergence at some point, but then it stops. And the residual cannot go below 10 to the minus 4. And this is despite the fact that I know for sure that there exists coefficients that give any accuracy I want for this BP. Again, here I'm solving the same linear system as before. I just changed the right-hand side because I changed the target of the approximation. So this effect, the fact that I don't get machine precision accuracy, is not due to the conditioning. It's really due to the fact that I have representations with very large coefficients, hence numerical instabilities. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that there is a fundamental flaw in the approximation properties of propagative plane wave somehow, or at least some limitation of the possible accuracy. And now I return to the second family, which is a generalization of propagative plane waves, which we call evanescent plane waves. Evanescent plane wave has the exact same formula. It's just simply a complex exponential. The big difference is that now the propagation vector D is going to be complex valued. It's still going to satisfy D that D is 1. So since D is complex valued, you have the real part of D and the imaginary part of D. So if you look at the formula, you can decompose the exponential in two factors. The first one is similar to a propagative plane wave. So there is going to be a factor that is a propagative plane wave, and the propagation direction now is going to be given by the real part of D. But the new factor is this one. So it's a real exponential. And you see that you have exponential decay in the direction given by the imaginary part of D. So exponential decay in the direction of imaginary part of D, exponential growth in the opposite direction. It's still an exact solution of the Helmholtz equation, since we only need to satisfy D that D is 1. It's still easy to use in numerical code. However, there's one thing is that it's much less used in the literature. The main method I know of that uses this type of waves are the so-called wave-based method, which is a work by Vindemey and his collaborators. One thing I want to mention is that contrary to the propagative plane wave, which had a unit modulus everywhere in the domain, since we allow D to be complex valued, there is a localization effect in a bounded domain. And this also means that we need some normalization of the wave. Otherwise, we may have exponentially large wave due to this new factor. One thing to notice is that, contrary to propagative plane wave, there is not the same degeneracy when you take small wave numbers or when the domain shrinks because of this localization effect. So I want to give a bit more intuition of what is this new parametric set. So the vector D is complex valued, it's satisfied D.is 1. It's a bit difficult to see how is this parametric domain. So to see this, you need to write D.D as two equations. You can check that this is valid. We get two equations on the real part of D and the imaginary part of D. And to explain the parametrization of this set, I've drawn a 2D sketch here. So this is the 2D case. You can see that if you want to have solution to this equation, the real part of D, the modulus of the real part, needs to be larger than 1. So you need to take real part of D outside the unit disk. Then you need to satisfy this equation. So if you pick a vector RD like this, and then you take the origin of the imaginary part of D to be here in this sketch, you need to satisfy the first equation. So the vector imaginary part of D needs to be on this circle here. And then you look at the second equation, you see that the imaginary part and the real part needs to be orthogonal. So you need to be on this line here. So there are two possible values for the imaginary part of D given this vector RD, this blue dot and this blue dot. And of course, then you can move around the position, this vector RD in the whole space, except in the unit disk. So I don't know if you followed, but it's not too hard at this point. It takes a bit of time maybe, but it's not too hard that you need to see that you need 3 parameters to parameterize this set. The first one is an angle so to represent a point in the unit sphere to parameterize this angle. Then this is the parametrization of the propagation direction. Then you turn to the parametrization of the imaginary part of the evanescent direction given by the imaginary part of D. And this lives in the orthogonal plane, and there is a constraint on the modulus. So you need another parameter, but in a unit sphere in the hyperplane. So you get the unit sphere in D-2. And you need one parameter to control the length of RD and ID, which are linked by this equation. So this is the parameter zeta, that is a real parameter, and which controls the decay strength, so how fast the wave decays. Of course, if you take zeta is 0, you have no decay, so you recover propagative plane waves. So this is really a generalization of previous sets. One thing that you can get maybe a sense of using this little explanation is that these waves are localized in Fourier domain. So roughly speaking, and this is not fully rigorous because this is not in L2 of RD, but this wave has a characteristic length or characteristic oscillation given by k times the modulus of RD. So somehow it's localized in Fourier space. And you can control the position in Fourier space through zeta, because as zeta increases, this characteristic length increases as well. This was not possible with propagative plane wave. So somehow, playing on this parameter, this zeta parameter, we can move around in the Fourier domain. And this is somehow an intuition on why this type of wave have better approximation properties. Okay, so now I'm going to get back again to integral representation using this type of waves. So I'm going again to consider continuous superposition of evanescent waves. So now I have an operator TW that maps densities to NMOS solution U. Since now the parametric domain is a bit more involved, I have a triple integral, but it's still an integral on the parametric domain. The kernel of the integral operator is still given by the evanescent plane wave, and the density V is still in L2 with a little caveat, which is that you need a weight. You need to consider a weighted L2 space. And why you need to consider a weighted L2 space? Well, it's mainly because you need to normalize, in some sense, evanescent plane waves. Since they can have a very large modulus, you need some normalization, and you can think of the weight as, in this integral representation, or in the weighted L2 space, as a normalization of the evanescent plane. And one thing also to notice is that this normalization should depend on the domain in which you want to work. Okay, so now I have an integral operator that depends on the domain omega. This was not the case before with the propagative plane waves. It's not too difficult to show that TW, so for suitable normalization weights, TW is bounded from L2 to the space of NMOS solution, equipped with the H1 norm. And again, for all V in the weighted L2 space, TWV is an NMOS solution. One big difference in comparison with the integral operator for propagative plane wave is that some elements in the range of this operator are singular on the boundary. And this is quite natural because you want to be able to approximate NMOS solution that can be singular on the boundary. For instance, if you have corner singularities in your domain. For weights that make this operator bounded, for suitable normalization, you still have dense image in the space of NMOS solution. But the real difference is given by this result. This is the main theoretical result that we have established with evanescent plane wave. So here I need to consider a specific geometry. We have been able to prove this so far only for disks and balls. But in this geometry, for a suitable weight, we can show that this operator, this integral operator, is boundedly invertible. So this means that any NMOS solution in the disk or in the ball have an exact representation of this form, and moreover, the density that is in this integral operator is controlled by the norm of U. This is not possible to have for propagative plane wave, even if you are in the image of T, because T was compact. In fact, we can prove a bit more. We can prove that in the parlance of evanescent plane wave, of frame theory, evanescent plane waves are a continuous frame for the space of NMOS solution. And this has another important consequence when we consider discretization of this type of operator, which is that the range of the adjoint operator has the reproducing kernel property. So this is absolutely not easy to see, but this is the type of result that we get. Of course, so we are able to prove this result in the particular geometry of the disk and the ball, but we conjecture that this holds for convex domains, and this is something that Nicolas is working on. The convexity assumption can be seen somehow because when you have a reentrant corner, you cannot localize the evanescent plane wave in this corner. This is a vague intuition of why there might be problems with convex domains. But this appears naturally in the analysis. Okay, so now if I get back to the Hilbert basis, so I'm going to talk mainly about the disk now. So I said that I have an Hilbert basis for the space of NMOS solution in the disk, given by these circular waves. And so you can extend, you can use a generalized version of the Jacobi-Unger identity to also prove that you have exact representation in the form given here. Also with the evanescent plane wave. This was already available with propagative plane waves, but the big difference is that in this case, the density that is explicitly known for these modes is now bounded in L2 uniformly in P. With propagative plane wave, the density had a norm that was blowing up with P. Now it's uniformly bounded in P. And moreover, you can prove that this actually forms an Hilbert basis for the reproducing kernel Hilbert space that is the range of the T star operator. So, in fact, this operator TW is diagonalized on the Hilbert basis for the RPHS and the space of Edmond solution. However, there is a big difficulty when you consider evanescent plane waves, and maybe it's one of the reasons why it's not so often used, which is that you have to build a discrete approximation set, and it's not easy to construct, not as easy as propagative plane waves. So one idea, now that we have an integral representation of all Helmholtz solutions, would be to discretize this integral. So the idea would be to build a cubature rule for this integral. However, there is a slight difficulty, which is that the parametric domain is a bit involved. In particular, it's unbounded. So we need cubature rules that can tackle such a domain. And we have not been able to come up with standard quadrature rules to be able to discretize this integral, in particular because of this unbounded domain. So instead, what we used is, and maybe this is a bit unusual, we used techniques from importance or optimal sampling method, which were developed in these two papers. So this type of method can give us information on where to sample in the parametric domain to obtain good information about the elements in weighted L2 spaces. There is a technicality that to be able to put these methods in practice, you need an orthonormal basis for the space in which you want to work with. And luckily, as I just explained, we know an orthonormal basis. We know explicitly an orthonormal basis. It's only available for a simple geometry, that is the disk of the ball. However, if you have a different domain, what you can do is simply to use the circumscribed disk or ball to this domain. There are maybe a bit more advanced techniques called determinantal sampling techniques that we haven't used. We use the second type of method, but it could be interesting to investigate. So I'm going to give a few details on how this method works. So what we do is that we draw the quadrature nodes according to an explicit probability density that is given by this formula, which involves the weights and an orthonormal basis element of an orthonormal basis for the space in which we want to work with, which is in our case the range of the T-star vector. So as I said, we know this orthonormal basis explicitly. So this is called in some communities, the reciprocal Christoffel function. It has other names in different literature. There is an important parameter in this density, which is the parameter P. So here you have a sum of the modulus of the basis, and you need to, in practice, to truncate this sum at some point. So this is a parameter that you have, and increasing this parameter, you expect to have better approximation capabilities. So somehow you can see this density as a measure of where is located the mass, so just given by the modulus in this case, of elements of this basis. And this is somehow sensible because this function are the pre-image of an Hilbert basis for the Helmholtz solution space. So somehow you can get some intuition on why this is a good idea to do. The main theoretical result that is available when studying this type of sampling techniques is that the nodes that you get actually provide a semi-norm on the space, which is equivalent to the continuous norm on the subspace given just by the span of the element of the basis that you put in the sum here. So this is the main theoretical result that can be used to prove results on this type of nodes. One thing that is interesting is that the number of sampling modes sampling nodes that you need only increases linearly or log linearly with the dimension of the space. So we are unfortunately not been able to prove that such nodes, we have not been able to prove error estimates using this type of discretization, but if we can finish this proof, such scaling, so M as depending log linearly with the P, would mean that we can effectively beat polynomial spaces method. So this is what the probability density looks like. In fact, it's a 1D function because it's uniform, it's constant with respect to the propagation and the decay direction. It only depends on the decay strength. And this is kind of sensible if you consider that you want to have isotropic approximation capabilities to have this type of results. So it depends mainly on zeta, the decay strength parameter, and it varies when you increase the truncation parameter P. What you can notice is that this density is peaked towards 0, which corresponds to propagative plane waves. So we recover something that we expect, which is that we need some propagative plane waves. But as we want to increase the approximation power of the discrete sets, you see that you need also to consider larger and larger zeta parameters. So you need, at the beginning, you need propagative plane wave, and when you increase the size of the approximation set, you want to include more and more evanescent plane waves. So as I was saying, unfortunately, we are not being able to derive error estimates using these discrete sets. However, numerical evidence shows that we indeed get much better approximations in practice, and I will show you some numerical experiments to support this. And what is important to notice, at least empirically, is that the representation that we get have small or bounded coefficients. And this means numerical stability, so we can effectively compute these coefficients. This is the main difference with propagative plane. However, I want to point out that we have not improved, using this new basis, we have not improved the condition number of the matrices that we use. The matrices are still ill conditions, but because the representation that we are computing has small bounded coefficients, we can actually compute them numerically. And to support this claim that you need representations with bounded coefficients, I'm going to give an abstract result, which is due to Bennett Koch and Daniel Brecht. So I'm going to state a result in which I'm going to consider two approximations of this type, so discrete sum of plane waves with two different coefficient vectors, mu and psi. So here, psi, you have to think of it as the approximate solution to a nil condition linear system that you're going to write to get your solution. That is computing using a regularized and backward stable algorithm. So this is to deal with Gauss conditioning. So then, if you get this approximation solution vector that you can actually compute numerically, you get this type of error estimate. So this error estimate is, so the right-hand side is the result of an optimization problem over all possible coefficient mu, and it features two terms. The first one is the approximation error, and the second one is epsilon times the coefficient, the norm of the coefficient vector mu. Here, epsilon is a regularization parameter, so it can be small, but it cannot be below the machine precision. And what you see here is that the necessary condition to have, sufficient condition to have small error for the solution vector that you compute using this algorithm, you need both approximation capabilities with bounded coefficients. So this is a general result that is actually, yes, general, but which supports the claim that you need a representation with small coefficient to be able to compute this coefficient effectively. Okay, I just want to mention that a similar condition was already identified in the method of fundamental solution by Alex Barnett and Timo Bethke, which is not about a plane wave. It is also can be seen as a trace method where the plane waves are replaced by fundamental solutions. of the PG under consideration. Yes.
What are the norms?
Yes.
Here this,
So here you can actually, here you have to be a bit careful, but you can write this with the energy norm for the error and the discrete norm for me. So here I have hidden some constants that will inevitably appear, and there are some constants. It's not. Here you have some constants that I didn't write explicitly. It will depend on the formulation that you have and so on. Okay, so now I want to look again to the numerical experiment that I explained with propagative plane waves. So I'm going to again try to approximate first a propagative mode in the disk with the basis, the discretization basis using the importance sampling or optimal sampling techniques. Here I reported the previous experiments with propagative plane waves in red, and I have added the result with evanescent plane waves in blue. So you still see exponential convergence to machine precision for this propagative mode. The convergence is a bit delayed, but this is the price to pay to be able to do that, so to approximate to machine precision the evanescent. Before the convergence was stopping because we had very large coefficient. Now we can reach machine precision because the norm of the coefficient is much smaller. And I want to insist on the fact that in both cases, the matrices are ill-conditioned. The difference between the ill-conditioning, between the two matrices is that in this case, with evanescent plane waves, you are going to have much more singular values above, machine precision. Here you have only a finite number of singular values in the matrix that are above machine epsilon. And as you increase the size of the approximation set, this does not increase. Whereas here, the number of singular values larger than machine epsilon increases actually when you increase the DOF budget M. Okay, so I will conclude with some more numerical results. A first result in a high frequency context. So here, the target of the approximation is computed as the sum of circular waves, so elements of the Hilbert basis that is available for the NMOS solution space in the disk. So I have 401 terms in this sum with random coefficients. So this is the type of solution that you get. You see that it's very oscillatory. You have the real part of the solution on the left and the modulus on the right. K is 100, so it's really oscillatory. And I'm going to approximate this solution without any mesh, directly using plane waves, both propagative plane waves and evanescent plane waves. And the number of plane waves I'm going to choose is twice the number of terms here. So somehow we pick an element in a space of dimension 401, given by the span of the 2p plus 1 circular waves, and we use twice as many plane waves, and we see what we get. So here I show the error, the pointwise error, on the left with propagative plane waves, and on the right with the evanescent plane. And what you have to notice here is the difference in scale. I have order 1 error basically for the propagative plane wave case, whereas here the error is of the order 10 to the minus 9. So I have 9 orders of magnitude of difference between the two errors. So you have almost no accuracy whatsoever with propagative plane wave, whereas you have basically single precision.
But if you look on the left of the boundary, the errors are the same order as on the right side. So it's just a boundary problem.
Yes, yes. So it's true that the error on the boundary is slightly larger, but it's not, this error inside is not 10 to the minus 9. There is maybe a few orders of magnitude of difference, but it's not only on the boundary. Similar result in 3D, so this is much more computation or expensive. So here the wave number is only 5, and there are more modes. So the circular waves become spherical waves with spherical Bessel function and spherical harmonics. So here I have 676 terms in this sum, and I'm going to use 4 times this number for plane waves. So I don't report the solution here, I just report the error, still on the left with propagative plane waves and on the right with the evanescent plane wave. And you see something similar as before, so you have a bit less than order 1 error for propagative plane wave, and you have 10 to the minus 8, let's say, for evanescent plane wave. You can notice here a bit more easily that the scale of the error, the characteristic length of the error is much smaller here than here. And this is a result that comes from the fact that propagative plane waves are unable to approximate stably fine oscillations in the solution. Okay, I'm going to skip this. And I'm going to show you some results for different shapes, because I've only shown results for the disk or the ball yet. So here, the triangle. So remember that to build the approximation set for the triangle, we use the circumscribed disk to this domain. The target of the approximation is, in this case, is given by a fundamental solution. So fundamental solution has a singularity S. So in 2D here, we are using the Hankel function, and the singularity is located here. So it's outside the domain, so that we have the solution. And as the singularity gets closer to the boundary, you have a much more difficult solution to approximate. This is the real part of the solution, and here are the numerical results. So here I'm reporting the energy norm, so the H1 norm, for propagative plane wave and evanescent plane waves, still against the DOF count, so the DOF budget that you have. And you see again in this shape that, so this is a very smooth solution, even though there is a similarity outside. You have exponential convergence of the H1 error, but the convergence stops for propagative plane waves, whereas you can have arbitrary accuracy with evanescent plane waves. So again, this is due to numerical instabilities of propagative plane waves. Something a bit more involved. So the aim is to have then a Treff method. So another formulation for Treff method is, for instance, Treff discontinuous Galerkin schemes. So here I'm going to apply this scheme to a mesh of 8 triangles, to mesh a square, but you can extend to any mesh that is polygonal or polyhedral in 3D. And this time, I'm going to approximate the corner singularity. So here, so basically, a corner singularity is like a circular wave. So you have the Bessel function and the Fourier function. The difference is that the index mu here, I'm going to take not only integers but also real values. So here the origin is on the middle of the left edge. So here the cylindrical coordinates with respect to this spot. So here I report the real part of the solution for mu is 1. So this is a smooth solution. And here are the results. Once again, exponential convergence. This is smooth, but convergence stalls. So this is a bit better now, but still the convergence stalls for propagative plane waves, whereas I can get machine precision accuracy for evanescent plane wave. What's more interesting is when we switch to a non-integer value for mu. So in this case, I'm going to take mu is 2/3. This corresponds to a corner singularity with a right angle. And in this case, you can prove that the solution mu has finite Sobolev regularity. So it's in H1 plus mu plus some positive epsilon. And here are the numerical results. So again, convergence and stopping convergence for propagative plane wave. Arbitrary accuracy a priori achievable for evanescent plane wave. The difference is that now I have finite regularity, so I need to, this plot is in log scale for the number of degrees of freedom. Since I have finite Sobolev regularity, I expect only algebraic decay and not anymore exponential decay of the solution. And this is exactly what we observed. And so this is the result for a mesh made of triangles. Actually, if you look at similar results for the disk, you can observe numerically that you get the optimal rate of convergence that you expect. Okay, I'm going to conclude quickly. So the summary. So I was interested in two types of representation of Helmholtz solution in bounded domain. The first type was integral representation of Helmholtz solutions. And for so the main point is that for propagative plane waves, the map, the density V to the solution U has dense image but is compact. So it does not have bounded inverse. On the contrary, any Helmholtz solutions in the disk or the ball have a representation of this form with a bounded density. This is the big difference. With evanescent plane wave, you can prove that the density is bounded, whereas with propagative plane waves, it can be very large. And this translates in the numerical code as numerical instability with propagative plane waves. The representation has very large coefficients, so you cannot compute them in practice. Whereas for evanescent plane wave, you have bounded representations, so small coefficients that you can actually compute in practice. So I would argue that the redundancy and the reconditioning are not the issue with this type of method. The key is to have stable representations. So you not only need to prove error estimates, you also need to prove the stability of this representation. And by stability here, I mean bounded density or bounded coefficients. And with that, I will thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Emile. So are there questions?
Yes, I'm sorry, maybe a question, but I need the coefficients, what you call the CM, or how do you compute them? The graph that you showed is for the optimal one, it's for the one you construct?
Yes, so I didn't explain how I construct them. So for instance, these ones, so here I'm on the disk, so I can just, so the method is very simple. It's the simplest method I could think of. I'm using the Dirichlet data of the solution, so of the PT function, sampled at equispace points on the boundary, and I solve from this Dirichlet data. And you can actually prove that this type of estimates hold in this case. You just have to exclude the case where you are on a Dirichlet eigenvalue when kappa squared is the Dirichlet eigenvalue of the Laplacian. This is just a technicality.
But you're sure that taking different coefficients, even for the plane wave case, could not give better?
So for evanescent plane wave,
the drawback that you saw for plane wave, not evanescent plane wave,
yes,
is it due to this construction of the CM?
No, no. So precisely. So you know that this holds. It's a 1D into D. It's a 1D integral from 0 to 2 pi. So t pi is a real parameter from 0 to 2 pi. So you can discretize with the trapezoidal rule. You will have probably exponential convergence of this rule. So the discrete sum that you get converges exponentially to the solution DP. You can actually compute analytically the coefficient, and I have done that already also. I didn't report them, but I have also done that. The problem is that you get a sum. So you get a sum of this type. You have analytic expression for the coefficients, but whenever you want to evaluate this sum, you have numerical instability. In fact, because the information that, the important information that is stored in this coefficient is in the significant digits that are below machine precision at some point. And you need to rely on constellation to be able to represent this solution. And this is why in finite precision arithmetic, there is no hope. The only hope is to increase the representation, the floating point of representation. And you see clearly here, so I took an example where I have some accuracy, but if I convert P a bit more, I have order 1 error. And you see actually, so here you have 10 to the 12, here you have 10 to the minus 4, and this is not a coincidence. It corresponds to the difference between 10 to the minus 16 at the machine name side.
Yeah.
Moi, je vais poser la question en français, parce qu'il y a plus de monde qui va comprendre si je la pose en anglais. Moi, c'est plutôt dans philosophique, quand tu définis tes BP, tu fais intervenir les fonctions de Bessel.
Ouais.
Moi, je ne comprends pas d'où ça sort, en fait. Pourquoi? Alors, ok, une fois que tu as dit BP, c'est ça. Après, j'imagine que ta formulation intégrale, c'est parce que tu as fait la formulation intégrale de JP, c'est ça. C'est ça qui va te filer le BP. Mais pourquoi tu définis BP comme ça, là-haut? C'est ça que je ne comprends pas. Alors, peut-être tu l'as dit quelque part, mais je ne l'ai pas entendu.
Donc,
Ouais, ça, là. Voilà.
Ces fonctions-là,
Ouais,
c'est les solutions à variables séparables de l'équation de Helmholtz.
D'accord, quand tu résous ça, tu trouves une fonction de Bessel, en fait. D'accord. Okay,
en résolvant,
en faisant bêtement à la main.
Oui. Séparation des variables,
okay.
On trouve ça.
Okay. Et ça marche dans le disque.
Ça marche dans le disque, ça se généralise à la sphère.
D'accord. Après, c'est une géométrie un peu différente.
Alors, on ne pourra pas le faire.
Voilà, parce que ça, c'est les harmoniques vraiment de.
Ouais. Mais là, c'est pour illustrer le fait qu'on a des représentations exactes intégrales des éléments de cette base hilbertienne.
Est-ce qu'on aurait une représentation intégrale un peu du même genre si on prenne par exemple une ellipse? Imaginez qu'on a des fonctions qui ressemblent à des fonctions de Bessel, ou tu vois, où tu. Oui, c'est ça, ça va être des fonctions elliptiques.
Oui, c'est les fonctions de Mathieu pour l'ellipse. Donc on peut avoir des représentations aussi intégrales de ce type-là pour les ellipses. Mais pas...
Et après, ça ne marcherait pas quand tu prends un tort ou un truc comme ça.
Peut-être.
D'accord.
Essentiellement, pour avoir ce type d'expression explicite, et ça aussi explicite, il faut des géométries séparables.
Autre question? Je sais pas, quand tu disais que sur un domaine avec des points réentrants, ces méthodes ne vont pas marcher. Et par exemple, si c'est un domaine, par exemple, juste un L-shape comme ça, est-ce que si tu coupes bêtement en 3 cubes et que tu appliques la méthode discontinue, est-ce que ça va fonctionner?
Oui, j'ai déjà testé, ça fonctionne. En fait, donc, ce qui va se passer, c'est que pour des géométries non convexes, on va avoir encore de l'instabilité numérique dû au fait qu'on peut avoir des solutions de Helmholtz qui vont être singulières dans l'enveloppe convexe. Et donc, dès qu'on coupe en éléments convexes, on peut appliquer la méthode.
Est-ce qu'il y a des questions à distance? Non. Eh bien, donc on remercie encore notre conférencier.